So War in the Diamond is a film about the Yankees and then Indians, now Guardians, and their rivalry. And it's based on a main thread of the film is the book, The Pitch That Killed. And it's a story about Ray Chapman, star player for the Indians in 1920, sadly dying of a pitch from Carl Mays, who pitched for the Yankees. So what we did is we tell that tragic story. And ironically, what happened in 1920, for maybe some of you don't know, the Indians ended up winning the World Series. So we kind of talk about that tale, the behind the scenes of that, the book, the wonderful book. And then throughout, what I do is tell different anecdotes about the rivalry between the Yankees and Indians. Something I was taught as a kid is to hate the Yankees. And so I think this was the birth of that. You have to have a starting point. And so what I thought of is, well, this is where it started. So if you're from Cleveland, where did we start hating the Yankees? 1920. So we take you through all these moments. There was Feller, DiMaggio, who actually were very good friends. But Feller, actually in his autobiography, talked about how he hated the Yankees and hated New York and loved beating them. And so we get into that. The Yankees fans used to taunt Feller a lot because he used to really complain about going to play in New York and against the Yankees. So we get into those days. And then into the late 40s with the integration of the Indians with Larry Doby in 48. They actually beat out the Red Sox and the Yankees to go to the World Series and win. And so that was a big moment. The Indians were the first integrated team in sports to win a championship in 48 with Page and with Doby. And then we get through the late 40s and through the 50s. And then 54, the magical year, where the Indians win a historical amount of games. And they beat the Yankees again. And the Yankees at that time were still segregated. They did not have a black player on their team. So we get into the differences between those two ball clubs at that time. And then we get into the 60s, right before the 60s, sadly, another tragic moment where Herb Score was hit by a line drive by Gil McDougall, another Yankee-Indians moment, and that forever changed Herb Score's career in life, obviously. And then you get into Steinbrenner years. Steinbrenner tried to buy, who, by the way, let me give some backstory. George Steinbrenner grew up in Bay Village. He was from Cleveland. He actually tried to buy he grew up as a huge Indians fan and then tried to buy the Indians in 71. We explained why that failed, and then he kind of took his revenge out by buying the Yankees and become the Yankees owner. And then we get into recent days with 97, 98, the Bugs game in 2008. So for people who are wondering, there is still a tie today because as long as there's a Steinbrenner family owning the Yankees, well, they're from Bay Village. So there's technically a Cleveland family that owns the New York Yankees. Yeah. That says a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you guys able to throw in a last-minute snippet of the Josh Naylor fiasco?
No, no. But I like, I'm glad you brought that up. I like that kind of stuff's in sports. I'm not going to make judgment on what Josh did, but I like that I like the rivalry in sports. I like that I like Josh Naylor's energy. I like that he fired up us and made the Yankees fans and Yankees mad. I think rivalries, from my time of doing all these documentaries, rivalries are very important in sports, and they're good to have. It's good to have a natural thing. And Yankees-Red Sox is huge, by the way. And we're not comparing the two. What we're just saying is there's a lot of uniqueness and there's a real rivalry between these two teams. And I think that's very healthy in sports to have.
Sure. And you'd be a great person to, really touch on this and bring some color in the sense where there is a complex of each of these two teams, but especially each of these two cities, where Cleveland, you have the us against the world mentality. We literally think everyone's kind of out to get us, and the little guy and the hard grit and the factories and the whole deal. And then you have New York with all of their money and, the glitz and the swagger that they bring. But it really makes for an interesting pair and an interesting rivalry, kind of a David and Goliath type deal.
There's a lot of that truth, and it is. New York is slick, it's fast, it's about Wall Street, skyscrapers, banking. Cleveland is blue collar, but there's a lot of Cleveland too that's business, a lot of health, a lot of insurance history here too. Ironically, there's a lot of players and a lot of people here who are both New York and Cleveland tied, especially in the early part of the 20th century. Rockefeller just spent a lot of time in both cities trying to develop them, and in fact, if you look from a city grid map, Cleveland and New York are very similar. They have boroughs. There's Tremont. There's Brooklyn. There might be two Brooklyns between each town. So in all my research, there's actually, when these two towns were built, they were built very similarly because a lot of the big players were going back and forth between Cleveland and New York. You know, ironically, Cleveland was thought it was a top 3 or 4 city in America up until really the late 40s, early 50s. So Cleveland was a major, to be fair, Cleveland was a major player. And in my opinion, something that when you talk to historians and journalists, Cleveland at one point was going to build a subway, and it ended up not happening. And you have to wonder if that subway would have been built if there would have been more of a similarity between the two. All that said, there's no doubt the personalities are very different. Cleveland's definitely a little bit more Midwestern with a New York eccentric, I would say. And New York is New York. I mean, look, it's Wall Street. They probably look at Cleveland and be like, this is just another city in our way.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, you've done a lot of different projects, especially surrounding Cleveland. You know, Believeland is one of the most notable ones that you can say with 30 for 30 in ESPN. Where does your love of Cleveland sports and Cleveland sports history come from?
Family. My family are sports fans. My family is very ingrained into Cleveland. My dad was a salesman, so I was born here. I was born in Elyria. Parents lived in North Olmsted. But my dad was a traveling salesman, so I moved in a lot of different places in my life. But it always came back to Cleveland. And ironically, my mom and dad are not from really Cleveland, but it always came back because they loved the city, and that's kind of where I originated from with all my love. I mean, we always came back here for vacations. We always did things, and we always had such a great time. So Cleveland was a big part of my life. I don't know how to really explain it outside of that. Family really pushed it. And to be truthful, when we have family talks and discussions, Cleveland's usually a big part of it, and usually sports. And so my belief is when I got to ESPN, a lot of people ask, like, how'd you get in here? It's like, because of the city of Cleveland. I mean, truthfully, like, that, I love the city. I was born here. I just bleed it. I can't help, like, you can't take it out of me. I don't know what I would do without it. So all I can explain is, like, I was ingrained to it because my parents loved the city. They taught me to love the city, and I did love the city, and I still do to this day. I just think it's family. I don't know what else to put it. It's kind of in the blood.
You know, not being from here, being from Chicago, also a really huge, you know, sports town. But there is something different about a Cleveland sports fan where they bleed different. Where does that come from?
Well, I think a lot of it is Cleveland wears their emotions on their sleeve, and not that other sports fans don't. But what I mean by that is there's a lot of economic ties to the sports teams. I thought I explained in Believeland at times, where you can see the economy when teams are doing well. Usually the city's feeling well, and that was honestly, that was a huge part of what happened in the '70s here in Cleveland. I thought it was a big boom or bust too in the '90s, and obviously in the 2000s with the LeBron era. So because of that, the city franchises really almost represent us. And that might not, and by the way, that's probably unfair at times, but it is. It's kind of how we see ourselves as equals. And so that's how big it is. What I would say is these are professional teams in a college fandom atmosphere. This is the kind of fandom stuff you would see at Auburn or at Alabama or at Ohio State, rabidness, and just being almost like you're ingrained because you went to school there. It's kind of how it is in Cleveland with the sports teams. It's almost like we went to college here, and so it's just kind of ingrained in our blood that way. It's just a rabid fandom, but I think the sports teams really play a key role in how we feel emotionally and economically.
Sure. When people watch War on the Diamond, what do you hope, obviously after they watch it, what do you want them to walk away thinking and feeling?
I would hope they understand that there's a lot of ties between these two teams, that there was a big moment that was very sad and tragic that happened in '20. When you're growing up as an Indians fan, I think we always talk about 48, 54, definitely the 90s into the 2000s, and probably now actually what happened last year in 2022 is going to become a moment now where people look back and go, God, that was a fun year being a Guardians fan. So with 20, that's kind of a forgotten year, and ironically, it's the year the Indians won the World Series. So I'm hoping they learned a lot about 1920. It was a magical year that had a horrible tragedy that ended up being a year where they won the World Series. So kind of bringing it back to that, and then telling these tales again throughout the years, because there is a lot of connection between Yankees, Indians, now Guardians. These two have a lot of connections. And I just hope that it kind of brings to life why these two teams, in my opinion, have a rivalry.
Sure. You guys have already had some success with early showings.
Yeah.
Just tell me a little bit about that.
So we did a tour of film festivals. We did Boston to open, and it was great. We had Dan Shaughnessy there. We also had a few other high brass baseball people there. It was a great night. Dan Shaughnessy really was complimentary about my film, which meant a lot. He actually wrote a little blurb about it in his Boston Globe column, which is a very big compliment. And we were very surprised that we actually won Best Film, Best Documentary in Boston. That's a huge compliment coming from a city where we did not do anything on Boston. That really meant a lot to me, and I think it meant a lot to the team. And then we did Chagrin, which was incredible. Chagrin was fantastic. I shouldn't bury that. We had the Dolans there. We had a lot of the high brass there from like Bob DiBiasio there. And that was a big night. I mean, to have someone like the Dolans at your film and say very kind words about it meant a lot to me. And I'm very thankful for the Dolans and Bob DiBiasio. You know, I'll just give 1 second on him. He's a great man. And he really is a cool dude. So if you see him in the city, and you really want to have a cup of coffee with someone, and I know it's sometimes the athletes, I would choose Bob DiBiasio. I think Bob's a great man, and he's very knowledgeable, and he's a great storyteller. So we did all these different film festivals. We did something in Newport and Houston, and we actually won an award too in Houston, which is a very complimentary thing. And now it's time to go live. It's time to bring this thing up on November 15th on Amazon and Apple TV.
Yeah, I was going to say, where can people watch?
So go to Amazon, go to Apple. You can go to any SVOD program. So if you got Xfinity, you can buy it on demand there. But Amazon and Apple are the easiest, and that's what we're really plugging for people. November 15th, it will go live. You can always go for more on WarrenTheDiamond.com. You can also go onto the Twitter handle at WarrenTheDiamond. There'll be information there. Or you can go to me at Official Cleveland Sports, and I'll be plugging it a lot. And it'll be easy. It's just a click and play, and it's $5. You go do your thing, and you watch it.
Fantastic. Just real quick, a little resume. You've done Believe Land. What are some other projects?
I did Believe Land. I did a film called The Two Escobars, which was really, I made the tour around. I did a film called Bad Boys, The Book of Manning, was a film I produced on Eli, Peyton, and Archie. That was an interesting, experience, to say the least. I did, gosh, there's so many that come to mind. The Birth of the Big East was a great film. It's called Requiem of the Big East. I learned a lot on that project. There's a film called Winning Time, which kind of gave me my first taste of New York, doing documentaries on the Pacers and Knicks rivalry, which is actually kind of similar to this in a way, but I think different, but still similar. So yeah, I've done a lot of 30 for 30s. I've been really lucky. I just did a documentary series called Saturdays in the South. That was huge. That was on the history of SEC football. So I've done a lot of different things in my career. I'm very lucky to be where I'm at. I'm from a kid who was born here, went to University of Toledo. I'm sometimes amazed where I've done in my little career, to be honest with you. Check out Warren the Diamond. I really hope you guys enjoy it. There's more projects for me coming down the pipe. And like I said, you can always come to me at Official Cleveland Sports, and I'll be talking to you guys about that.
Perfect.